There is something I have never said out loud to anybody back home. The morning I sold the last thing I owned, I sat in a grocery store parking lot with both hands locked around the steering wheel, even though the truck did not belong to me anymore. The new owner was standing 10 feet away, waiting politely with the title folded in his hand. I could smell cold coffee in the cup holder. I could hear a shopping cart rattling across the asphalt. It was February in Ohio, the kind of gray morning where the sky looks like wet cement and the wind finds every opening in your coat. I was 66 years old, and everything I had left in the world was inside one canvas duffel bag on the passenger seat. One bag, that was it. The truck was a 2004 Ford Ranger, dark green, dented above the rear wheel, with 211,000 miles on it. It was not beautiful, it was not collectible, but I had driven it for 17 years. I had carried tools in it, slept in it twice, moved my daughter into college with it, and taken my wife to the hospital in it the night our grandson was born. When I handed over the keys, it felt less like selling a vehicle and more like signing away proof that I had once been useful. The man gave me $4,600 in cash. $4,600. 2 months later, I was sitting on a small covered balcony in Tagaytay, drinking coffee while mist moved across the hills. My rent was 18,500 pesos a month, about $330 at the time. A woman downstairs was sweeping fallen leaves with a broom made from stiff palm ribs. Somewhere beyond the wall, a rooster was arguing with another rooster like they had unfinished business. I had no truck, no house, no workshop, no storage unit, no furniture with my name scratched underneath it. And for the first time in years, I was not afraid of the next bill. My name is Walter Briggs. I am 68 now. I grew up outside Dayton, Ohio, and for most of my adult life, I repaired appliances. Washers, dryers, refrigerators, dishwashers, anything with a motor, a wire, or a customer convinced it had stopped working on purpose. I started as a service technician for a local chain, then opened my own little repair business in my 40s. Briggs Appliance Service, nothing fancy, one truck, then two, a rented workshop behind a tire shop, my name on the side of the vans in blue letters. For a while, I thought I had built something solid. I was never rich, but I knew how to work. That was my identity. You called, I came. You had a freezer full of meat warming up. I found the bad relay. You had 3 children and a washer that would not drain. I was there before dinner. People handed me checks at their kitchen tables and told me they were glad there were still men who could fix things instead of throwing them away. I liked hearing that. I needed to hear that more than I understood at the time. Then the business started thinning out. New appliances became cheaper and harder to repair. Parts took longer to arrive. Big companies sold service plans. Customers tried repairs themselves, then called me when things went wrong. I kept going because that is what men like me were taught to do. You do not admit the road is ending. You press the gas and call it determination. I know. Famous last words my wife, Carol, had been telling me for years to close the shop. She said we were feeding money into a machine that no longer worked. I heard criticism where she was trying to give me a warning. By the time I finally shut the doors, I had run up credit card debt, borrowed against the house, and emptied most of the retirement account I had spent 30 years building. Then Carol got sick. It started with pain in her back and a tiredness she could not shake. 6 months later, we were learning words we never wanted to know. Treatments, scans, copays, specialists, medication schedules. The business was already failing, but I kept one van running because I needed income. I would repair refrigerators in the morning and sit beside her treatment chair in the afternoon, still smelling like dust and machine oil. She died 11 months after the diagnosis. Grief came like a ceiling, lowering 1 inch at a time. I could still function, but every month there was less room to breathe. After the funeral, the numbers became real. The house was worth less than I owed once the second mortgage and overdue taxes were counted. I sold the tools, the spare parts, the workbenches, the second van, then the first van. I held an auction where strangers picked through 40 years of my hands. My best tools sold for almost nothing, and I stood there saying, "Good deal," as if I were helping them. The bank took the house. I moved into my daughter Emily's finished basement outside Columbus. She never made me feel unwelcome. I want that understood. She and her husband cleared a room, bought me a lamp, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. My grandson carried down old baseball magazines because he thought retired men liked them. They were kind. That almost made it harder. You are 66, sitting on your daughter's basement sofa at 10 in the morning, trying not to make noise because she works upstairs. Your clothes are in plastic bins. Your mail goes to her house. Your Social Security deposit comes in, then disappears into minimum payments and old obligations. You wait until everyone has gone to bed before you heat soup because you do not want them to think you expect dinner. Nobody is treating you like a burden, but you feel like one anyway. I tried everything before I left. I called a senior apartment complex with an 8-month waiting list. I looked at rooms for rent where 6 men shared one bathroom. I applied for part-time work at hardware stores, appliance counters, and a home improvement warehouse. One manager looked at my resume and asked whether I could stand for 8 hours. I told him I had stood for 45 years. He smiled like I had misunderstood the question. I considered driving deliveries, but the Ranger needed brakes, tires, and a transmission repair that would cost more than the truck was worth. I checked places in rural Ohio, Indiana, even Kentucky. Every cheap apartment had a catch: utilities not included, deposit equal to 2 months, no bus route, no nearby clinic, no vacancies until spring. At night, I opened a notebook and did the math over and over. $1,784 a month coming in, credit cards, medication, food, insurance, rent if I could find it. There was never enough left to feel safe. The Philippines entered my life because I could not sleep. That is the honest answer. One night around 2 in the morning, I was watching videos on my phone with the brightness turned low. I started with a man comparing grocery prices in different countries. Then I watched a retired teacher show his apartment in Iloilo. Then a widow from Arizona talked about living near the water in Bohol. The videos kept coming: rent tours, hospital visits, market trips, visa explanations, mistakes people made, things people missed from home. I expected to find a trick. There is always a trick, I thought. Maybe the apartments were fake, maybe the prices were old, maybe everyone making the videos was selling something. But then I found ordinary people, men with bad knees, women counting prescriptions, couples arguing about air conditioning, people who did not look rich, adventurous, or especially brave. They looked like people I might have met in a waiting room. One man said something that stayed with me. He said, "I did not move here to become somebody else. I moved here because I could no longer afford to be myself back home." I wrote it down. For 3 months, I researched quietly. I joined expat groups and read arguments about cities, hospitals, landlords, scams, weather, traffic, and loneliness. I made spreadsheets, compared flights, and studied the documents I would need. I spoke with two retired Americans living in Tagaytay. One had been there 6 years, the other had arrived 8 months earlier. Both warned me not to expect paradise. It rained hard, power could fail, traffic could be maddening, and some people would assume a foreigner had money. They also told me I could rent a clean apartment, eat well, and have money left at the end of the month. Money left. I had forgotten what those words felt like. Emily found out because she saw the flight prices open on my laptop. I expected anger. Instead, she sat beside me and asked whether I was serious. I said, I think I have to be. She cried. Then I cried, which surprised both of us. She told me she had been afraid I would spend the rest of my life hiding in that basement, getting smaller so nobody had to worry about me. I told her I was afraid leaving would look like abandoning the family. She said, Dad, you are allowed to save yourself. The only problem was money. The Ranger was the last thing I owned that anybody would pay real cash for. I had kept it because owning a vehicle made me feel independent, even when it sat in the driveway leaking fluid. Selling it meant admitting I would not rebuild the old life. There would be no new workshop, no little apartment in Ohio with my truck parked outside, no return to the man I had been before Carol got sick. I listed it for $5,200. A young man offered $4,600. I said yes. After he drove away, Emily picked me up in the grocery store parking lot. My duffel bag was between my feet. I had the cash inside my coat. She asked whether I wanted to go home. I said, I do not know where that is anymore. 3 weeks later, I flew out of Chicago with one checked bag, one backpack, and a folder of documents. I checked so often the corners went soft. I barely slept. Every time the plane shook, I wondered whether I had mistaken desperation for courage. When I landed in Manila, the heat wrapped around me before I reached the pickup area. It smelled like exhaust, rain on concrete, and something sweet frying nearby. Horns sounded from every direction. Drivers called out. Families waited behind barriers with signs and flowers. Exhausted, I could not understand how everybody else knew where to go. A driver arranged through my temporary rental met me near the exit. On the way south, motorcycles slid through spaces I would not have considered spaces. Buildings gave way to roadside shops, fruit stands, and stretches of green. Then the air changed. As we climbed toward Tagaytay, it became cooler. I rolled the window down. I remember the smell of wet leaves and charcoal smoke. I remember seeing pineapples stacked at a roadside stand. I remember thinking very clearly, I am too old to have no idea what happens next. My first room cost 1,600 pesos a night. It had a narrow bed, a humming air conditioner, a plastic kettle, and curtains printed with red flowers. The first morning, I woke before sunrise to dogs barking and a rooster announcing himself directly below my window. I made instant coffee and sat on the edge of the bed. No workshop, no basement, no truck, no Carol. For about 10 minutes, I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. Then I opened the door. The air was cool enough that I could see steam rising from the coffee. A woman across the lane was arranging bread in a glass case. Two school children in uniforms walked past, sharing an umbrella even though it was not raining. A man on a tricycle lifted his hand and said, "Good morning, sir," like he had been expecting me. That did not solve anything, but it got me through the next hour. My permanent apartment took 11 days to find. It was on the second floor of a small building on a quiet side road. Cream walls, tile floors, one bedroom, a little kitchen, and a covered balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs. The furniture did not match, and the refrigerator was smaller than some tool cabinets I used to own. The rent was 18,500 pesos, about $330. The deposit and advance rent took a large part of the truck money, but once it was paid, I sat at the little table and wrote out my monthly budget. Rent, electricity, water, internet, food, medication, transportation, visa costs set aside, emergency savings. For the first time, the total was lower than my income, not by thousands. I did not become rich. I did not start eating steak every night or living in a resort. But I had room, a few $100s of room, enough to replace shoes before they split, enough to see a doctor without deciding which bill to ignore, enough to take my daughter and grandson out when they visited the following year. That space changed me. At first, I still lived like I was in crisis. I saved containers, turned off every light, and checked my budget before accepting coffee. It took months for my body to understand that no collection notice was coming. The strange thing is, the better life was not really about the apartment. It was about being expected somewhere. A man named Ramon ran a small repair shop near the market. I met him because the fan in my bedroom started clicking. He came to look at it, and within 5 minutes, I was holding the ladder while he opened the housing. We talked about motors, bearings, old washing machines, and why modern circuit boards fail in ways that make no sense. When he learned what I used to do, he began calling me when an American-style appliance gave him trouble. I was careful. I did not come to take work from anybody. I did not need a job. I just helped now and then. I would sit beside him, point at a wiring diagram, or show one of his younger technicians how to test a capacitor safely. They called me Sir Walter, which embarrassed me at first. Then, one afternoon, a young technician named Paolo repaired a refrigerator using a method I had shown him. He grinned and said, "You teach good." 4 words, "You teach good." I went home and cried on the balcony. Back in Ohio, I had started to believe usefulness had an expiration date. Here, nobody knew the business I had lost or the house the bank took. They only knew I could explain why a compressor was overheating. They knew I arrived when I said I would. They knew I liked my coffee without sugar and that I always carried a small flashlight. Little by little, I became visible again. I joined an early walking group, found a market stall I liked, and learned to carry an umbrella even when the sky was blue. A neighbor bringing food did not mean I owed a grand gesture. Sometimes she had simply made too much pancit. There were hard days. The first Christmas was lonely. I got food poisoning and spent a night convinced I had ruined my life. I also trusted a man who promised faster paperwork and lost 6,000 pesos. The Philippines did not remove human nature, including mine, but mistakes stopped feeling fatal. That was new. When Emily visited, she stood on my balcony and watched the mist roll in. My grandson complained about the rooster, then recorded it for his friends. Over steaming bowls of balalo, one cool evening, Emily looked around the table and started crying. I asked what was wrong. She said, "Nothing. You just look like Dad again." I did not know I had stopped looking like him. People hear my story and think I am telling them to sell everything and move across the world. I am not. Some people would hate it here. Some need to stay near family, doctors, and familiar systems. Others arrive expecting the country to heal them, then discover they brought themselves along. I brought myself along too. The worried man, the proud man, the widower, the father who hated needing help, the businessman who could not admit his business was over. All of him came through the airport with me. The difference was that here my income gave me time to meet him honestly. I no longer wake up calculating what I can postpone. I wake up to the scrape of that palm broom downstairs. I make coffee. Some mornings the sun reaches the balcony. Other mornings the fog is so thick the buildings across the road disappear. Ramon may send a message about a stubborn dryer. Emily may call. I may walk to the market and come home with fruit I cannot pronounce properly. My life is smaller than it used to be. One bedroom instead of a house, no truck, no workshop, one shelf of clothes, a few photographs, a toolbox that fits under the kitchen counter. But smaller is not the same as worse. I used to own rooms I was afraid to lose. Now I rent a small place I can afford, and I sleep through the night. I used to have 2 work vans and no time to sit with my wife when she felt well. Now I have no vehicle at all, and I know the names of the people I pass each morning. I used to believe dignity came from never needing anybody. Now I think dignity comes from having something to give and being willing to receive something too. Sometimes I still think about the Ranger. I can picture the cracked vinyl on the steering wheel and the coffee stain near the gear shift. I hope the young man who bought it changed the transmission fluid. I hope he uses it well. Selling that truck felt like the final proof that I had failed. It turned out to be the first decision I made for the life I still had. I was 66 years old in a cold parking lot with 1 duffel bag and $4,600 inside my coat. I thought I had sold my last possession. What I really sold was the idea that my best years had to look like my old years. Now I am sitting on the balcony again. The coffee is hot. The hills are hidden behind morning mist. The woman downstairs is sweeping leaves into a neat pile, and the roosters are still arguing about something nobody else understands. I own almost nothing, and I live better than I ever did.